So this story begins back in 1998 when we formed a company, Clearmind, a corporation, and bought this land out in Langley, this 16-acre site to host all our workshops. And we weren't very good at running a business. Initially, I just thought, well, we're spending $5,000 or $6,000 a month in renting facilities for our workshops. Why don't we buy a place and put $5,000 or $6,000 towards a mortgage instead? Sounds like a great deal. But we forgot about maintenance and taxes and all kinds of things like that. And
taxes are a thing.
And a few years later, we got into some really serious trouble. And I treated our taxes much like my personal taxes prior to that, which I could let go for a couple of years and just catch up. But with GST, you can't do that. So I'll get to that in a second. Anyways, I'm flying off to London to kind of break Clearmind into the UK. And it was a big opportunity. I was invited there by a person running a huge conference on a Course in Miracles conference. And there's going to be 400 or 500 people who wanted to come and speak, with the idea of us doing workshops there as well. So in those days, we were broke. I had arthritis in my left hip. I could barely walk 2 blocks without having to sit down in agony. Not many people knew that because I hit it quite well. And we took the cheapest flight I could find, up all night long, going from Vancouver to Calgary to Toronto to London. By the time I get to London, I mean in the air or in waiting rooms for about 24 hours. I get to London midday. The only directions I have is go to the Lancaster Hotel near Paddington Station. I got suitcases. I can't even afford a suitcase with wheels. I got arthritis in my left hip. I am jet lagged. It's pouring rain. I asked somebody, where's the Lancaster Hotel? And they said, oh, it's just around the corner. I go to that one in the rain, carrying these bags. And remember, I got bags that have got heavy weighted bags with flyers and brochures and tapes. And I get to the Lancaster and they say, oh no, there's actually 4 Lancaster type hotels in this region. Which one are you looking for? Huh? I spent the next 3 hours trudging in the rain, carrying these big bags in agony, just beaten. And I get into the hotel and I all I want to do is get to sleep. And I bring my bags into the room. And soaking wet, and I decided to go down to the lobby onto the computer to just check in with what's going on at home. In those days, you didn't have laptops and phones. You had to go log in somewhere in a lobby and pay some money for that. So I log in, and my assistant in Vancouver says, I don't know how I'm going to tell you this, Duane. Revenue Canada just seized our bank account. You owe $30,000 in GST, and I think we're done. Here I am in London, jet lagged, in pain, wet, tired, broken. I spent a night in absolute hell. I had pulled many rabbits out of hats prior to this in terms of keeping our company going and keeping it alive, mostly based on being in good relationships with a whole lot of people. But I didn't know what I was going to do with this one. And I certainly was not feeling very, very enthused about giving an inspiring talk in front of 500 people at 10 a.m. the next morning at the Columbia Hotel right next to Hyde Park. And somehow I got through the night, and I spoke to Catherine briefly, but again, phone calls were very expensive then too. And it was just a crazy maker. And by the time I got to the hotel, I decided I was going to actually go there. I remember standing in front of that podium, looking out at this crowd, just feeling like an absolute failure. Like the things that come up in my brain where you don't belong here. Who have you been trying to kid? You pulled you've been a bit of a pulling magic tricks the last few years, but you're finally, that's it, you're done. Like just my father committed suicide in 1986, and suddenly I understood what that kind of crossroads would be like.
Why are we starting with this story?
Why are we starting with this story?
This is the deal with life. If COVID has taught us one thing, it's that life is going to throw things at you that are completely unexpected and in many ways out of your control. I mean, in this particular instance, GST is not entirely out of our control. However, that is part of the deal with life. And so often as we're moving through life, we have this idea about what it's supposed to look like. And it's as if we're going to fight the forces that align themselves against us, and we have to try and make it happen somehow, right? We have this idea, this is what my life is supposed to look like, this is what I want, and life appears to just throw obstacles in our path over and over and over again, these challenges that we face. The reality is these challenges that we face are part of the way that we are meant to get to where we're going. Change is a process. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail, but change is a process of making friends with the things that we run into over the course of our life that sometimes are completely inconsistent with what we think it's supposed to be. So how do we make friends with the idea of change? We have to be able to view it in a much wider context. So we're going to show you a little commercial clip here to illustrate the theme of our talk. It's a Jeep commercial. We're not actually trying to sell you a Jeep, but listen to the whole part of the commercial before the whole sales pitch.
In 15 meters, turn left. Recalculating. Go straight to a steady job. Recalculating. Stay single until you're 34. Recalculating. Follow the company rules. Recalculating. Start a diet. Recalculating. 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 Introducing your all-new Jeep Compass. Love, hope, happiness. Whatever your destination, there's a million beautiful, ever-changing ways to get us there.
Oh, that is so love, hope, and happiness.
Whatever your destination, there's a million beautiful ways to get there. Wow. And therein is the theme of our presentation. So, to understand this concept, whatever your destination, there's a million beautiful ways to get there, really means that we're here to align with the force of evolution, with actually what is at the heart of change, whether it appears to be cooperating with the direction that we want to take in life, or whether it appears to be getting in the way of the direction that we want to take in life. Our particular way of viewing the world is from a spiritual context. We're not religious per se, but we believe that the foundation of what runs this universe, what runs our relationship, ultimately is a friendly foundation. That evolution itself is ultimately a friendly force. So as with this picture, there's a little acorn that has within it the impulse to become an oak tree. That is true of who we are as humans. It is true of who we are as humans as a collective as well. That who we are together is more than who we are separately. And within that collective, there's actually an impulse to grow. And where we want to grow to is ultimately a good place. So here we are, every single day, navigating our way through different dilemmas, through different challenges, things that are unfolding in our personal and collective lives, constantly confronted with decisions, pressures, recalculating, as in that commercial. We have a choice to make in those moments where the challenge is in front of us. Because what we often want to do in the moment where we face a challenge and we're being confronted with a decision is, instead of kind of opening ourselves up with curiosity, asking ourselves, what is possible here? What don't I know? What is this force for evolution wanting to open up for me, potentially? Maybe it's a good thing, even though it looks scary, even though it looks not quite like what I thought it was supposed to look like. What if it's a good thing? Rather than that, too often we see it as it must be bad. And when it's bad, we kick into our strategies for control. And this is really critical because too often, the very strategies we turn to are the things that prevent us from changing. Our old defense system, our old control strategies are the very thing that, in a way, end up contributing to the outcomes that we complain about. It's like the movie Groundhog Day. Too often, we end up in this pattern of repetition, running into similar, apparently bad events over and over again. And we have something to do with that happening, actually. So tonight we're going to be talking about 5 principles that are at the core of systems theory, and particularly as it pertains to psychological family systems theory, that we need to consider to create real positive, lasting change. In systems theory, we refer to this as second order change. First order change, which is what most of us attempt to accomplish when we're making all of our New Year's resolutions and all of our plans.
Which would be the control side.
The control side. First order change is like adjusting things on the surface that are all still grounded in the old familiar foundation, the familiar way of thinking, the familiar way of being, the familiar way of seeing the world. So it's like my stomach hurts, I take an antacid, right? There's something happening. I'm going to do what I'm used to do to just address the surface around it, but there's some underlying issue that's happening, and what I end up doing doesn't actually deal with the underlying issue. Second order change is treating the real problem. What is happening that there's pain in my stomach? Can we take a look at what's going on in my stomach so that I can heal that, whatever it might be? So number 1 principle is everything is connected. We, particularly in the Western world, like to think of ourselves as individuals wandering around on our solo mission in the world who have the option to connect or not. But the reality is everything we think, feel, say, or do has influence on other people. And we're also constantly being influenced by those around us. We define ourselves and experience ourselves through relationships with other people. And we don't think of ourselves this way. If you think about it, we think we can just disconnect. I'm going to cut this person off. I'm going to unfriend them on Facebook, for example. The reality is, when you take that action, you are not actually disconnecting. You are maintaining a relationship and sending a message to that person about your relationship to that person. You're not actually disconnecting. You're saying something very unfriendly to that person about who they are. And that's what ends up getting passed around in your relationship network. So we're not individuals. We are part of a system. We are part of a collective.
Right.
This process of evolution is actually calling us to be aware of that collective. The reality is that humans have survived because we learned to cooperate and we learned to care about each other. 300,000 years of evolution has come about because we have got each other's backs. We're at a very critical crossroads in our development as a human species. What has gotten us this far is that we have evolved to love and care for each other. We need to love, we need to care, not just to receive caring and love, but a need to care and love, a need to consider other people's interests.
That's such an important point, that we actually need to care. To the degree that we try and convince ourselves that we don't, will equal that our degree of suffering. It's so important. We'll return to that later on in this lecture. But on that note, as individuals, we think this is how communication works. That when I say the sky is blue and Catherine hears it, she represents blue in her brain and files that communication as a communication. That's called the content message, but it only takes up about 20% of what is actually going on between two people whenever they engage with each other. 20%. The other 80% is a relationship message. As Catherine said, we can distance in relationship, cut off and unfriend people, but actually when we're unfriending somebody, we're communicating to them, I'm unfriending you. It's a very, very powerful communication. It's not a neutral one at all. And when we run into difficulty in relationships, we think the problem is being either inside of self or being inside the other. And most often, actually, if we're honest, we think the problem is inside the other person. And that feeling about another, if we're feeling tension in our relationship, and we're maybe talking about what we're going to eat tonight, that relationship message is alive all of the time. We don't get to turn it on or off. What I think about you, what I think about us, do I trust you? Do you care about me? Do I care about you? After we have a conversation, after you have a conversation with anyone, a few hours later, you may have a harder time remembering what you actually talked about, but you will not have a hard time remembering how you felt. That lasts forever. That is what is being injected into those lines in the previous two slides with the network of how we're all connected. Those lines are on 24/7. And what we put into those lines will tell the story of the quality of our life more than anything else. It will also tell us a story about the quality of our world. So from this perspective, every connection we have either reinforces the problematic level of consciousness that we carry, or it evolves to a healthier state.
So our second principle is causality versus feedback. What that means is that problems occur in those based on what we put into those lines in our relationships. And based on how we behave and what we put into those lines, based on our relationship messages and our patterned ways of being with each other, we actually form contracts with those around us. I do this, you do that. It's like a little dance that we do together. We're used to it. And that's when a pattern occurs. This isn't how we think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We think about it more often as, I have done this because you did that. I have to do this because you did that. We think about it as a causal relationship. So person A, in person A's mind, right? Person A nags therefore person B has to avoid. This is person B's story about the whole situation. I have to avoid you because you're constantly nagging me. From person B's, wait, have I got my A's and B's
No, that's all right,
correct?
or whatever.
Person B avoids because person A nags.
And I nag because you avoid.
We think of these in our two separate ways of being as causal relationships, but the reality is this is a really simple way of illustrating what is a relationship pattern. How do we get into these cyclical reinforcing things that occur over and over again, that over time, it's like a handshake. I'm going to do this when you do that.
Right. And we think the situation is causing us to feel that way, but we've actually brought that feeling in with us. Whenever you have a strong feeling in the middle of a difficult situation, you think the situation has created or caused it, but actually you know this feeling, you've had it your whole life. Now you've got an explanation for it. And what we see in those moments is so far detached from reality. What we put into those lines is a projection of what we think reality is, and we seek to prove it over and over and over again. So if I have had a history of being abandoned or rejected or hurt, traumatized, I'm going to have a lens of I don't trust, and I will push that into my network lines, and I'll only count evidence that supports that, and I'll call it reality. But we don't know what reality is. Reality is profoundly subjective.
So, related to this, we actually learn our reality in the context of the system or the family that we grew up in. What are systems? Systems are families surrounded by cultures, surrounded by societies. They're people interacting who have influence on us all the time. And there are rules that govern these systems. There are rules that govern your family systems. Today, there's a lot of talk about intergenerational trauma. There's also a lot of talk about systemic racism. What does that mean? It means that we have a way of being that isn't even necessarily conscious, a patterned way of being that keeps everything the same. And rules come from often generations that preceded us, not even necessarily our own life experience. So 2 generations ago, for example, my grandmother experiences a trauma. The family experiences a trauma of some kind. That story may or may not live in the family stories that we tell each other to date. But what will live is what grandma taught her children to do to make sure that bad thing never happens again. The defenses are taught to the generations that the subsequent generations out of really good intention. We don't want this bad, horrible thing ever to happen again. What do we need to teach you to make sure that it never happens again? And out of that process, there are rules about how we're supposed to be with each other. Who is safe? Who is not safe? How do we interact with strangers? How do we interact with people who are close to us? And that governs the kind of situations we end up finding ourselves in. Next one. Because based on what we then put into our relationships, all of this prior learning, right? All of this stuff that has fallen on us from generations that have preceded us, the experiences that we've had in our lives as well as a result. Based on that and based on how we are in our systemic context, life organizes itself around that. We learn to be a particular way. We learn how to connect. We learn what's allowed. We learn what's not allowed. We learn what's safe. We learn what's not safe. And when we try to change, we run into all of those rules inside of ourselves. Don't do that. Uh-oh. That's not who you are. That's not safe. That's not okay. We run into all of these old historical fears and rules inside of ourselves. We also run into it outside of ourselves in these important relationship lines. And that's not, again, out of bad intention. Everybody just expects you to be the way that you have always been. And so they are surprised and somewhat resistant when you pop in there and want to be somehow different, right? It's like a mobile, finely balanced. When you hit one part of it, everybody is impacted. And people want to get it back into a nice, familiar territory. So we know we're throwing a lot at you fairly quickly. Yeah. Hang in there, because we're going to illustrate it all with a story.
It is just so sad
soon.
when you describe it that way. When we realize how the cycle of stuckness, how it's we just can't stand it very long before we have to just re-kick in our rules in order to survive, and just stopping what comes next, stopping this. Evolution is a force that is moving through that system, this whole network here, whether you align with it or not. It's in action, and it's waiting for you to get on board. It's almost like a train coming to your station, you know, like it's going to keep moving, it's going to keep going, and it stops and the door opens. Are you going to enter it, or are you just going to stay where you are, thinking the same way, interpreting life the same way, much like me at this podium, staring out at that audience? You know, here I am. I got messages coming all over the place about what this means. It's exactly what my father concluded. The challenge of change is learning to give a moment to learning to align with that evolutionary force consciously, actively, and behaviorally, even though you have no idea what it is. Systems are in constant motion and will evolve more or less successfully depending how open or closed you are and the system you are in is. If there's anxiety and upset and conflict, and the moment happens, you just close down right away, nothing new is going to happen. It's asking for something more. So you have to know where you're going. You have to know who you are, and you have to know where you're going for this to happen.
Recalculating.
Recalculating. What were those words again at the beginning? At the end?
Hope, happiness.
And there's a million different ways.
Whatever your destination, there's a million beautiful and different ways.
Right. So I'm covering Alice up. There she is, looking at the Cheshire Cat and Alice in Wonderland.
That's Alice down there.
And she says, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" She was lost. And the Cheshire Cat says, "Well, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to." "Well, I don't much care where." "Well, then it doesn't matter which way you go." It's really, really important to establish the goal from the beginning. There's a quote in A Course in Miracles that goes like this: "In any situation in which you are uncertain Now, I want you all to reflect on this right now in your lives, where you are, like in any situation which you are uncertain, and we all have to be right now. The first thing to consider very simply is, what do I want to come of this? What is this for? The clarification, folks, of the goal belongs at the beginning, for it is this which will determine the outcome.
And so what is this goal? What is this thing that will act like a compass as we are moving through life, that will guide the recalculating, the recalculating, the recalculating? Our very strong belief is that because we are connected, the goal must be collective. Because we are connected, the goal must be collective. It does not make sense, despite the brainwashing that we have received in this very individualistically focused Western world. It does not make sense to have an individual ambition that negatively impacts others, because we will never feel good even if you achieve the thing. If you win at the expense of somebody else losing, you will not feel good.
And we will not evolve.
Period.
And you will not evolve.
And this has been shown over and over again. Countless psychological studies have shown that we are happier when we give to others, not when we get. Financially, in every way, shape, and form. We are happier, we feel better when we are extending something into the collective, when we're having positive impact on other people. So the goal itself has to be collective in some ways, based on two things. It has to come from who you authentically are, what's genuinely important for you, love, hope, happiness, whatever it is. And it must then extend to others, because it is in that extension to others that you actually get to experience it yourself.
Love, hope, and happiness has to be non-negotiable. It doesn't matter what they run into, that has to be their mantra.
Recalculating.
Yeah, that's what they're going to look for. They're going to find it in no matter what happens. And once the goal is established, there are a few things we need to do. The first one is we have to be in absolute full alignment. And the first one is thinking. Our thinking. We have to decide that we're going to reflect rather than reload the moment we run into difficulty. I'm going to reflect what's going on here for me. What's really happening here? What am I not seeing? What is my goal? Can I find it anywhere in the middle of can I find it in the middle of this craziness? Standing in that podium? Can I see it here? And to lean towards that openness and curiosity, exploring what you don't know, rather than turning to what you think you do know to guide you. Reflect rather than reload these old strategies. That's a life changer. The idea is to engage in a thoughtful exploration, constantly widening the context around whatever you're facing. The more we widen the context, the closer we get to actual reality, although we'll never get all the way there, because the context of that is infinite. One trick, folks, one trick to get into this new territory is to view the current difficulty you're in from the perspective of the goal as if you had reached it. Asking yourself then, from looking at the goal, like push yourself down a year or two down the road, having gotten through all of this, looking back at this dilemma. How would you see your dilemma then as being a stepping stone towards this goal, which it is, or an obstacle? So in other words, can you search for and witness evidence of the attributes or message of your goal in the middle of whatever you run into? There's another course with miracles. We've got a few of those tonight. If love is all you want, really, love is all you will see. Profound. Okay.
So this next one is the big one in terms of the work that we do, because so much of our work is geared at what happens for us at an emotional feeling level. We really, really, as a collective species, need to learn how to change how we relate to anxiety and emotional pain, to let ourselves feel it rather than acting so quickly to alleviate it, to get rid of it, to numb it, to make it go away. And I get that emotional pain is uncomfortable, particularly anxiety. It is uncomfortable. And I swear to you that people do not die of emotional discomfort. I swear on everything. People don't die of it. We can do ourselves tremendous harm trying to get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
We need to learn how to accept that pain rather than being so pain avoidant, because what we don't realize is that we create tremendous suffering in avoidance of our legitimate pain. The pain, like the pain in the stomach, like the headache, the pain that emerges both individually and collectively is there for a reason, and we need to address it. If you got a headache, it's there for a reason. The pain that emerges, both in our societies, in our families, in our individual selves, is there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
We have to start by letting ourselves actually feel it. And it's actually an evolutionary opportunity. It's like a growth spurt or an evolutionary wormhole that can move you to a different level of experience if you learn how to just let yourself have that feeling. And we don't just kick into what we usually do to get out of the bad feelings. Because again, those reactive patterns are what keeps the cycle going, right? Mm-hmm. Our reactive defended behaviors keep the patterns that we complain about going. Mm-hmm. So we start by taking responsibility for our own anxiety by letting ourselves feel it. We often use this phrase, which is sit in your anxiety, meaning let yourself feel it. Don't kick so quickly into what you think you got to do to make it go away. Don't be pushed around by it. Don't make decisions in the middle of a state of anxiety. So here is the deal with feelings. All of the things that we are so quick to want to get ourselves out of, the things that we consider negative emotions, are really only a hair away from the feelings that we actually want in life, right? So if you think about fear and excitement, the literal experience in your body is almost identical. Same is true of anger and passion, sadness and joy. You can't selectively numb. When we let ourselves expand our capacity to tolerate discomfort, we also invite all of the amazing feelings that we want on the positive end of the spectrum. We give ourselves the chance to actually feel all of that. So out of those two steps, allowing the feelings and reflecting, will emerge new action. It actually requires doing something, putting something into the relationship web, right? Reflecting, letting yourself feel the feelings, reflecting some more, and often what will emerge is some kind of undefended, vulnerable action, vulnerable communication. And vulnerability is key here. Mm. Vulnerability is your superpower. Mm-hmm. Does not feel like it at the time, but vulnerability invites connection. And connection is literally a powerful, powerful correction, the kind of loving cementing of those relationship lines that are in our system is what we all essentially need. We need to start generating care in all of those lines.
It's your superpower.
It's your superpower.
You've never said that before.
It just came to me, Duane.
I like it a lot.
Yeah. And it's a tough one because we have all been taught that we need to be defended in some way. And yet, how are we ever going to learn to care and consider each other unless vulnerability isn't part of the mix and really an important foundational part of the mix? So, so important.
So, when she said vulnerability is your superpower, I just really let that sink in, because it like introduces, there's a whole other world that's waiting to be entered into. I like to use the word magic a lot lately. Not that we create magic, but we enter a magical world once we disarm ourselves from this cyclical control pattern of avoidance and not tapping into this extraordinary friendly force of evolution that you are. That is your home. That is your home. Can you imagine? Can you remember what it's like as a child getting up out of bed on a Saturday morning when your parents were still falling asleep and you just had a free day in front of you, and you enter the day like this? Anything is possible, because anything is. Anything is possible. So I'm going to return now to my story. My story. There I am standing on this podium. And I mean, if people could read my brain in that moment, they you know, there was so much going on for me. I was coming face to face with my father around giving up. I understood. Like, this is the time just to call it a day and just get a paper route for a job. Just stay away. But
So in that moment, just to tie all these little threads
Yeah.
together, right? In that moment, standing on the podium, what wants to emerge is, I am a failure. That is my reality. If I am a failure, the defense that wants to come out of me is give up. I'm just going to slink off to the side, you know, make my way out of this situation. Continuing a legacy, actually, that began before you, because your dad did feel like a big failure in many ways.
And even to reflect more, you know, on the rules that can happen there, because it's such a painful feeling, and I return back to another kind of life. I may have a rule about, don't ask me how I'm feeling. Don't get too close to me. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to express it. I just want to get drunk. And that could be passed on, that set of rules, from generation to generation without any kind of alteration, unless there's a brave one. And that can be you. In this moment, I'm about to remember what my father forgot. I'm standing on that podium and I'm starting to reflect. It's like everything just went in slow motion. I'm looking at this sea of faces staring at me like, who is this guy? And I'm reviewing my entire life. It's like, what brought me here? What's my goal? I started this work very, very inspired in psychology, and in my teens taking psychedelics and seeing, well, what world is that? What world is being introduced? What is this? There's got to be another way. There has to be. I grew up with the Beatles, the message, you know, just hope and inspiration. There has to be another way. And I thought to myself, standing there, nobody can take this away from me. I can only throw it away. And I'm not going to throw it away. If this is the last talk I give, so be it. But I'm going to give it. And I can give it with all my heart and soul. I'm going to be fully aligned. Every part of me is here now for this talk. And 10 minutes earlier, no part of me was there. was like going through that wormhole into this other reality. I was like, I'm not gonna let go of this. And so I gave my talk. And the audience was riveted. I didn't tell them anything about the story I was wrestling with. I just put it all into the subject matter. And I got a standing ovation. It was the first time I ever received one. 450 people having a hard time sitting back down. It was thunderous. And I thought I'd taken that right turn on that path into evolution. Like, what is it? What information is this? As opposed to all the other information I was carrying about fear and death and giving up and not belonging. What message is this? And I followed it. And again, even if it was the last time I ever spoke.
And that process has continued. I mean, there's a lovely ending to that story, which we don't need to get into tonight because we have another little surprise for you for our ending here. But that willingness to bring all of who you are to a moment and to give the world a chance to meet all of who you are is so critical.
That's what we do in our workshops. That's what we do. All we do is take you to that crossroads and give you the opportunity to discover what it is for you to walk on that path and get some new information. And the more information and the more experience you have there, the easier it is to actually go there. It starts to be not a place you just visit, but it's a place you can call home. So this is a slide of Laura Shaw, who took a number of our workshops. And at the end of one of them, she talked about this dream of hers of singing, but she was absolutely petrified because she really knew a lot. She wouldn't mind me saying this. She really knows a lot about control. She likes to be in charge of everything.
As for good reason, we
evolve
our defenses
we
for
don't
good
have,
reason.
But it was like, not going to do that. I think I'll just sing to my shower head, and that'll be as far as it's going to go. But we checked in with her about this more and more and more, and just uncovered the spirit underneath it all, her desire to express herself, despite all the rules and her bad experiences and everything that contributed to saying, no, you don't sing. So I'm an ex-professional musician. Well, I'm still a professional musician, I guess. I said, why don't you come over to my home, and I have a home studio, and I will record you. I have an isolation booth, and we'll record you. And she kind of, thought that was cute. Well, later on, she called me up and said, I want to take you up on that. And I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. So we're going to play you. She came over and recorded this, and I put a camera in the isolation room. We're going to play you her performance. I want you to really watch her and just see if you can see how much she's carrying. You can see it in the picture a little bit, just this is before we started. Just, oh my God, what's going to happen here? But she was brave. She was courageous. And she just, that 1% of her that said, yes, she is going to do it. So let's go to that.
My attic is full of pages, full of crazy, cluttered spaces that you could not cross. My attic is full of bones and full of hopeless young emotions that just won't grow up. I keep hiding the keys in all these places even I can't find. Hoping one day you'll find them all, and I wanna let you see inside my attic.
Just the quotes.
Recording this was one thing, right? This isn't just about pulling off, jumping out of an airplane or climbing Mount Everest, doing some individuated thing, folks. The integration of that experience only takes place when it's also relational. Laura was willing to trust me. We could have stopped it right there. Just the fact that she asked me to do it was already the big victory, breaking all her personal rules, and then giving me permission to now extend it to others. Even right now, she's watching. To be witnessed in the network, having a warm relationship message. I trust, I am now trusting. Without a witness, folks, it's only a concept. She put it into the relational network field. Playing it here is just another step and cements it. Here's what she said afterwards. Duane, taking this step, Duane, was like you were a fairy godfather. I love that. Sprinkling dust over my head, removing the cloak of darkness so I can see what I have truly possessed inside of me all along. I would never have seen the magic that I possess inside of me without taking this step. I was able to take off the lens that I've been looking through and see the love and the truth that I possess inside and experience the life that is truly waiting for me if I choose love over fear. And here's a couple of lines I just love. To experience life in technicolor instead of black and white, I got on the playing field, Duane, and actually experienced life. Here it is. I hear the crowd. I smell the popcorn, and I feel the rush from a home run. How awful would life be for me to not experience the magic of that song in myself, the beat through my body, through my veins, the emotion that it bubbles from within me that is involuntary. That's the process of evolution. How a song can bring me back to a moment so vivid, it's like that moment gets to happen right in front of me again and again and again.
And that is what we wish for every single one of you. You have a song inside of you. You have a lecture to give, whatever it is for you. There is something in you that wants to come out and be extended to this world, to your sphere of influence. And please, may we hold you, may we have the privilege of holding you as you make contact with that which wants to emerge out of you. So thank you all for your time and attention. Really appreciate it.